Greetings in the Lord. I'm Father Tom Legere. Welcome back to our continuing series on the spiritual journey. Tonight we are coming to you from Vasey Theater in Villanova University. And tonight we're going to be dealing with the subject of burnout. Have you ever felt frustrated and no longer enthused about your work? Well, there's a good chance that perhaps you're a candidate for burnout. And so our show this evening will be for you. Later on, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers from all of you in the audience. But first of all, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back.
The tragedy of child abuse takes many forms, from verbal assaults to hurtful blows. But it is preventable, and we all have a role to play. If you know of a parent having difficulty, reach out, sit down and talk. And if you're having difficulty, get help for yourself. Talk to a friend. Sign up for a parenting class. Take time out. Don't take it out on your child.
Contact the National Committee for Prevention of Child Abuse.
Tonight, then, we're going to be dealing with the subject of burnout. Burnout is something that seems to happen to people who are in the helping and healing professions in particular, people like teachers, for example. However, it's something that can happen to any one of us. And so I'd like to take a look tonight, first of all, at some of the symptoms of burnout to see whether perhaps you might qualify. First of all, you experience a sense of being depleted and run out of energy. Now, before everybody raises their hand and say, yeah, that sounds like me, what we're talking about here is that this is something that's on a chronic basis. You can never seem to get any energy, and you don't really seem to have any get up and go anymore. Also, you begin to feel a certain sense of helplessness based on impossible expectations. Say you're the mother of a couple of young babies, and you're expected to keep the house nice and neat and clean and to give these young children lots of love and affection and still work on your relationship with your husband, as well as contribute your time and energy to your church and be involved in your community and keep up with things happening in the world. And sometimes you're tempted just to throw up your hands and say, I just can't cope anymore. I just can't keep up with all of these expectations that people are laying on me. And as a result, because you feel sort of boxed into a corner, a lot of times you feel a lot of anger. You may begin to feel like you're being taken advantage of. And this is the kind of a situation that can lead a person to a sense of loneliness, a feeling that no one really understands what I'm going through. People don't appreciate all the stresses and strains that I'm under. And this begins to intensify the anger. There are various stages of burnout. It's not something that happens to you overnight. The first stage, the mildest stage, would be frequent bouts of irritability and fatigue and worry and frustration. You're not really sure how to get out of this because they seem to be happening more and more frequently in your life. Now, the second degree of burnout is very similar in that the symptoms are the same. However, the difference here is that the symptoms begin to last for 2 weeks or more. See, anybody can have a bad day. Anybody can have a bad couple of days. Anybody can have a bad week. But when you start having a bad 2 weeks or a bad month or a bad year, that's when you know that probably you're up against it and you are candidate number one for burnout. The third degree of burnout that is the most serious happens when the body begins to start screaming for attention. See, sometimes we don't really listen to what's going on inside ourselves, and so the body begins to start speaking in loud and clear language that none of us can miss. For example, a person might develop ulcers or migraine headaches, or colitis, or any of the other symptoms that seem to go along with psychosomatic ailments. At that point, we can no longer ignore the inner warnings because they have begun to erupt to the surface. Now, what are some of the aspects of burnout? First of all, physically, you begin to feel listless and worn out, and you have absolutely no energy whatsoever. And also, perhaps you're the kind of person who is subject to every kind of cold and virus that comes down the pike. Now, not everybody, of course, who gets ill like that is a candidate for burnout, but we're talking about people who are always sick. That indicates something. That indicates that we're run down and we no longer have the energy that perhaps we once had. Psychologically, the symptom is a little different. Here we begin to start distancing ourselves from our work. Did you ever feel like you were just going through the motions in what you were doing, either at home or at work? Did you ever feel that you were just putting in time so that you could just get your paycheck? Did you ever begin to start counting the years until you retire? I mean, that's a natural enough thing, say you're in your 50s or so, but when you're 25 and you have it all figured out how many years you have to go before you can finally retire, that's an indication that your heart is no longer in your work. Most people probably got involved in whatever they're doing because they wanted to at one time. But if you find that it becomes a bother, if you find that every single demand made on you is something that you resent, well, chances are things have gone too far. Spiritually, you begin to feel a loss of hope for yourself and for life in general. You might even begin to start questioning your own goodness, or perhaps the goodness of the people that you're around. You start questioning people's motives. And you say, oh, my boss is no good, and you can't trust people. When you start thinking that way, chances are you've gone a little too far. Now, how do you cope with something like this? Well, the inadequate responses to burnout would be these. First of all, you can just quit. Quit your relationships, quit your job. And of course, that doesn't solve anything. And that's not the way to go, because probably the next job you get into or the next relationship you get into, you're going to run into the same situation again. So that's inadequate. A second inadequate response would be just putting in time. You know, here it is Sunday night and already you can't wait till Friday. You haven't even gotten to work yet, and already you're feeling this great sense of resentment for what you do. And you say, well, I'll just put in time. After all, it's a paycheck. You're probably cheating yourself as well as cheating the people that you're working with. And of course, another response that's inadequate would be that of getting depressed. The classical definition of depression is anger turned against the self. When you begin to hate yourself, perhaps for the work that you're doing, and then you begin to even start hating yourself because you're no longer the kind of person that you would like to be in your job, then you can bank on the fact that depression is right around the corner. And the fourth kind of response that is inadequate to burnout would be having an emotional breakdown. And sometimes it has to go that far before people finally get the message. Well, obviously, all those responses that we looked at are inadequate. And when we come back, we're going to be taking a look at some adequate responses. We want to find out what we can do to make sure that we don't get burned out, or if we're feeling that way, that we can quickly recoup and get our act together again. So we'll be back shortly, right after these messages.
What can you do about AIDS?
Okay, we were speaking about the inadequate responses to burnout. What I'd like to do now quickly is to run through the adequate responses to make sure that we turn things around in our life. First of all, recognize the symptoms when it may be happening to you in your life. Luckily, a lot of things are written these days about burnout. It's no longer the big mystery that it once was. People no longer feel so guilty when it happens to them. They can approach their employer or their spouse and say, look, this has nothing at all to do with you. This is my problem that I'm going through, and I own what's happening to me. So face the symptoms and recognize them. Also, we need to develop what I call existential humility. Acknowledge the fact that there are only 24 hours in the day, and we only have X amount of energy. Sometimes a lot of us think that we can go on forever. And of course we can't. Eventually we run out of gas. So practically speaking, that means, number one, you set some concrete limits on your time. Now I know people probably think, well, that may be selfishness. One of the things I'm convinced about is this: you can no longer really love anyone unless and until, first of all, you love yourself. When your love for other people flows from a good, healthy self-image and self-regard, then it's the real thing, and then people will pick it up. So set some limits on your time. Also, cultivate deep friendships. Sometimes people get so into their work, their thing, whatever it is, that they have no time for friendships. They may be real whizzes in the community or the church or whatever, or their workplace, but they never really grow in their relationships with other people. Relationships are key to avoiding burnout. Also, avoid becoming a workaholic and learn to say the most difficult word in the whole English language, and that is no. A lot of times we feel so uncomfortable in doing so. You know, there's always somebody else who can do the job. I remember at one point in my life, because I tend to be a people pleaser, which is not really a real healthy thing to be sometimes, and I always felt I had to say yes to all the requests that would come my way. And one time I said, look, I just can't go on any longer. And so the next request that I get to give a talk or something, I'm just going to say no. And so the phone rang, and I picked it up, and I got all nervous because I was going to have to tell this person no. And I said, no, I can't make that talk. And the person said, oh, that's okay, we'll get somebody else. Well, I'll tell you, I was very disappointed. But learn to say no, and to realize that we've already had one Messiah. And Jesus himself, who's the person that we frequently point to as the very paragon of generosity, was somebody who learned how to say no. He was frequently unavailable. Oftentimes the crowds were looking for him, and where was he? He was out in the desert, he was out on the mountaintop, he was out on a boat. They didn't know where he was. Well, if the master can take care of his own needs that way and pull away from the crowd, then I think we have permission to do the very same thing. We also need to avoid ain't it awful sessions. When we indulge in negativity this way, this is one of the surest things that can sap our energy. And you know, an ain't it awful session almost has an energy of its own. If you doubt that, just try interjecting a positive thought in the midst of an ain't it awful session. And people will look at you like a side dish they didn't order. Where'd that person come from? You say, well, I don't think things are really that bad. And they go, you got to be kidding. When you indulge in that kind of negativity, it just strips all the energy from you. So avoid those kind of things. Also, maintain good health. I'm a great believer in that. In fact, one of our reel-to-reel presentations is going to be on holistic health, the integration of body, mind, and spirit. So many people act as if the needs of the body are not valid. They don't eat properly, they don't get enough rest, and they wonder why it is that they feel so dragged down and out of energy all the time. It's important for us really to consider our bodies to be temples of the Holy Spirit and to really work at taking good care of those bodies. We also need occasionally to take mental health days. Sometimes we are on the go all the time and we never ever do anything for ourselves. Isn't it great if we can just pull away from things for a while and just be? And I know that's difficult, especially if you have little children at home. But maybe you can get together with your husband or wife and work things out that way, that you can be sprung free for a day to go down to the retreat house or something and just be by yourself. And if you can't do it for a whole day, hey, how about a little 3-hour mini vacation? We're worth it. We're entitled to that. It's also important for us to develop outside interests. No matter what we're involved in, even if it's the greatest thing in the world, objectively speaking, if we get so much into that we don't diversify, then we are going to start feeling burned out after a while. At one point in my life, it dawned on me that I hadn't read anything except spirituality books for a whole year. And I thought to myself, hey, I like spirituality books, but there's more to life than that. And so I forced myself, in a sense, to start reading novels occasionally. And besides reading, get involved in community activities, get involved in exercise programs, aerobics, or whatever. Something that you do that is different from your normal routine. Also, have the humility to seek some counseling or spiritual direction if you feel like you're really burned out and you need some help. A lot of times, because of our false pride, we don't want to do that. Americans in particular, it seems to me, like to be in control, and I guess American men doubly so. But it really takes a big person, I think, to go and admit, hey, I have some problems. I need some help. When we do that, then we can really begin to get that help that we really need. And then, of course, I think it's crucial for us to plug into the source, namely the God found inside ourselves on a daily basis. This is where prayer comes in. I found out in my own life from personal experience that when I do not really meditate on a regular basis, I lose touch, I begin to feel irritable and anxiety-ridden. But when I can surrender each day a little bit more to the higher power, then I'm not going on animal energy or animal magnetism, but I'm going on the very energy of God. And that kind of energy lasts forever. That's the kind of energy that can really keep us going. Well, I'm sure that you have some questions that you'd like to ask about this particular subject. And we were going to give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you'd like to. And we'll be coming back to do so very shortly. Thank you.
From the Vatican to St. Hubert's, from Saudi Arabia to Mayfair, the Catholic Standard and Times, the official newspaper of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, brings the world into your home each week. The Standard provides a Catholic overview of events around the globe and in your neighborhood. For just 36 cents an issue, you can keep your family informed from a Catholic perspective, formed in its faith and inspired by the lives of others. The Catholic Standard and Times, serving more than 1 million Catholics in the Delaware Valley, make it your favorite newspaper.
Okay, everyone, now we have an opportunity for some questions and answers. Vince?
Good evening, Father.
Good evening.
I work as a vice principal at a high school, and it's extremely difficult every day dealing with discipline problems, dealing with teachers who are burned out, dealing with fellow administrators who are burned out. Fortunately, at this time, I'm not burned out. My concern is there might come a time, and I hope not too soon, where I might feel burned out. I heard what you had to say about being burned out. I've attended in-service workshops given for educators about being burned out. And yet I worry. There's going to come the time, and I hope it's not too soon, as I said before, where I will be burned out. I would like to know, and I've heard some of the signs and symptoms, not only what I can do to help myself, but what I can help my fellow administrators, my fellow teachers, whether it be just to certain signs to identify that I can help them or someday help myself. It's not more of a question, but maybe a statement to you, and I'm looking for that type of guidance.
Okay, Vince, first of all, I don't think it is inevitable that you or anyone else does burn out. I do think, however, that if one does not take the proper steps, it almost becomes something that is inevitable. I think what you need to do is encourage all of your teachers to take personal responsibility for their own lives and to realize that you as an administrator can't help them take care of their lives. It's not the business of the school. It's something that they have to take responsibility for, as do you. And it really does take discipline to try to be good to yourself and meet your own needs. I know that sounds funny because people say, oh yeah, I'd love to have some of that kind of discipline in my life. But I think giving people who are used to always ministering to the needs of other people have to actually develop kind of an asceticism of self-love. So I think you need to do that and give your teachers permission to do that. If they're hanging around the school too long, if they don't know when to say no, if you notice that they're becoming irritable and they're indulging in a lot of gallows humor concerning the kids, if they have begun to become cynical about that which they're doing, maybe you could just call them aside and say, hey, Joe, you didn't used to be this way. I wonder if perhaps you're beginning to show some signs of burnout. And then let the person know that it doesn't mean he's a bad person. Interestingly enough, burnout often happens to the most generous people. Some people actually need a fire lit under them.
That's true.
They're in no danger of being burned out. So you let a person know this is no indictment of you as a person, but because I care for you and because I see your value as a teacher, maybe we can sit down together and talk about how you could take some concrete steps to make sure that your own needs are being met so that you do not burn out. Okay, Terry?
You mentioned earlier that getting over-involved in community activities or being unable to say no to people, to constantly have to say yes, can be symptomatic of burnout. And then on the other hand, if we are experiencing burnout, one of the adequate responses would be to get involved in the community. How can we distinguish when something we like to do, some kind of community service or even exercise, can be bad for us? Could you elaborate on that?
Okay, I think whenever anything that we do has a should or an ought associated with it, then rather than helping us move away from burnout, it becomes part of the problem. In other words, if you genuinely enjoy community service, if you genuinely enjoy being involved in your parish, and this really springs from your heart, then it's understandable that that can be something that helps you avoid being burned out. But if you feel that, oh gee, I should get more involved in my parish and I should get more involved in my school, and then you start resenting what you're doing, number one, it's not going to help you avoid being burned out. And secondly, the people that you're helping will probably pick up your resentment anyway. And then you're not doing anyone any good. You're resenting what you're doing, and the people on the other side are picking up the resentment. So I think whenever it is springing from your own needs being met, then it is adequate and healthy. But whenever it's coming from the shoulds or the oughts, then it's unhealthy. Yes?
Hi.
Hi.
I'm a college freshman student, and I'm under a lot of pressure because it's a whole new workload and a whole new experience. So I was wondering, is there there's one thing that you should do that's best for you, or one adequate response, or should you divide yourself between pretty much all of them? Should you pick the one that's best for you or do a little bit of each?
I think you need to listen to your own intuition and move in the direction that seems to be the most pressing need in your life. I've noticed, for example, that oftentimes with college students, one of their main needs that they often don't address is the need to have enough sleep. People get involved in studying for exams, and they cram and they stay up all night and they're drinking Coca-Cola or something for the caffeine to keep themselves awake. And of course, in the process, your body is breaking down. So I think you need to begin perhaps with the needs of the body. Because if the machine that houses the spirit is not in good shape, then you're going to break down for sure. So I think probably the first thing to look at, if you're a college student, might be things like adequate sleep, adequate exercise, and adequate nutrition. And from there, then you expand out in looking in terms of adequate friendship, etc. Okay? Well, I think that our discussion tonight has been rather fruitful. I think some of the questions that were raised were really excellent. And the next time we get together, we're going to be dealing with something that follows up directly with what we're talking about tonight, and that is holistic spirituality, the integration of body, mind, and spirit. If you have enjoyed Reel to Reel tonight, we'd ask you to consider dropping us a line. The address is Reel to Reel, 222 North 17th Street, room 907, Philadelphia, PA 19103. You've been a wonderful audience. I thank you very kindly. Good night, everyone.
Oh, I haven't seen this in years.
Grandma, who's that? Is that great-grandpa and grandma?
Yes, it is. And that's Ellis Island. Your great-grandparents worked very hard to get there.
Why'd they come here?
Well, like many immigrants, they wanted to fulfill their beliefs and dreams.
About God?
About many things, especially God.
Religious freedom. A message from your Catholic neighbors.